Hello everybody and welcome from me, Philip Nothard and Curtis Hutchinson to this Motor Trade Radio, our special chat about the used value trends from Derren Martin, Head of Valuations at CAP HPI. Welcome to the show again, Derren. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Hi, Derren. Good to have you back on. Now, to set the scene, at the end of September, when we last chatted with you, CAP HPI's average used values had risen by a whopping 5.9%, which was the seventh monthly rise in a row since March, and the highest pound rise to date, because that was around £862. Now, you said you expected the rate of growth to slow down, which is exactly what's happened in October. So before we drill down into the details, can you tell us about some of the headline figures for October?
Yeah, so October there has been an increase during October with our live product by 1.2%, which is equivalent to about £145 on average. But probably more so than ever, the devil's in the detail this month. So it's definitely a slowdown from September activity. September was crazy. There were, as you said, the actual monetary amount was the highest we'd ever seen. The increases, it was really buoyant. There were lots of people out there buying, paying good money for cars, remarketers asking big money for cars. So the increase has slowed in October, but it's still an upward movement, which is and that is the first upward movement during October that we've seen. So it is unusual for values to still be going up. So it's slowed, but it's still relatively strong.
And to give that some context, you make a point in the editorial that a 1.2% rise in normal times would have been hugely significant, because you haven't seen that level of rise since 2012.
Yeah, any increase is actually something to talk about in a month, really, because values tend to come down. Cars are aging, and values tend to drop, and then you get a new plate coming in, which kind of resets things. But what's happening, this year is that values are going up every month. So when a single month went up before, it was big news, but it was generally by small amounts. So now we're almost a bit blasé about a 1.2% increase, but it's still incredible that values are going up, but it isn't across the board. So what I guess the term that I'm using really is that the market seems to be plateauing. So I've stopped using unprecedented and I've started using plateauing as the term.
Yeah, good call there, Derren.
So that's kind of where it is with this 1.2 or £145 as opposed to 5.9 and £860 last month. So a definite calm down.
And I think you made a point there, just before we move on to the next question, that the people forget that last October it was 2.1% going into November. And as you say, historically, you've seen, drops of as high as sort of 3.5%, 3.1% going into that month. So, significant swing still, all things considered, after such a strong period of increases anyway, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Quarter four is always the weakest quarter of the year for values. You get more cars generally coming into the supply area because of the September plate activity. You get more cars from sort of rental companies because they've needed the cars over the summer, and then they defleet them at this time of year. So you get a lot of that going on, and demand drops away in the final quarter. People start to turn attention towards Christmas and not making that necessarily a big purchase. So it is generally the weakest quarter, but it may well be. Well, I'm sure it will be the weakest quarter of this year, but that's off the back of really strong. Really strong year. Actually, a caveat on that: it may not be as weak as the first quarter because we were in lockdown then, and values did drop in the first quarter of the year.
Yeah, and you made a point there. We've had 8 months of rises. I think ignoring the sort of, like you say, that first quarter when we were in a lockdown. I mean, the rises have been to just over 27% in total for that 8 month period. But and as you say, you're starting to see that softening now. Do you think this is now a point where there is a bit of a realignment to the market, that, we are going into this final stage of the year? We've seen a significant period of increases, which has pushed values, we can't deny it, a high value, at a high price, haven't they, over the 8-month period? Do you think we're just now getting to this point of a price realignment, a bit of a sort of a breather, a bit of a sort of an assessment?
I think it's a breather. I'm not sure there's going to be a price realignment. I actually think that this plateauing will carry on for a while, and I do think it will stay strong. We talk to all the manufacturers, and there's no new car supply coming through in waves to affect the used car market. Obviously, if new cars come through, used cars will then appear as swappers. But this semiconductor and other component shortages, logistics issues, this is going to be here for a long time to come. So even though demand is likely to drop away a little bit, there's economic factors and end of furlough and as we say, the final quarter of the year, I don't think the supply is going to mop up. It's going to cause demand. It's going to cause values to drop because demand has dropped. I think we'll get a bit of a realignment. There's a little bit of a balking at paying some of the high prices. Some of the big buyers are out of the market at the moment. They've stocked up. They've paid strong money for cars, and they're taking a bit of a breather. But what I actually think that this 1.2% being a calmer movement up, but still a movement up, and the market hasn't crashed, that it could stimulate some demand from retailers to try and buy cars now they know that it's a little bit more stable. And I don't think values are going to come crashing down. I really don't believe that. There may be a small movements down, but it's going to be really dependent by sector and by models and things like that. So there could be some cars going down. I still think that some cars will continue to rise in value as well during November. And
you made a point there of, obviously, that a lot of the big buyers are out of the market because they've been buying pretty heavily in terms of earlier on to get that product. And is that the key message that you're trying to get out now, that actually not to panic? Yes, there's a lot of, you pay some good money, but this is not the turning point. This is just a plateau. Is that kind of the key message you're trying to get out to some of these larger groups that may have significant levels of investment tied up in stock that they paid, good money for over the last sort of few months?
Yeah, I really believe that. I mean, we're a guide. People have got to, if they've got money tied up in it, they've got to do what they think is right. But honestly, when you see the volumes that are going to come through into the market, as I say, it's not any time soon that there's going to be a big tsunami of those. So I think it's time to, I would still be suggesting that the dealers buy. I would be suggesting that they hold their prices and don't reduce them. Maybe we've seen a little bit of realignment of a bit more return to normality of cars that maybe have been a bit sticky and haven't moved for a while, that they're being realigned. But generally, I would say hold nerve on price, stick to it. Consumers will still buy. They'll be back in the market. There will be some demand between now and Christmas, obviously, and it will probably come back even more in January as well. So I would say that there isn't a crash coming, and plateauing will probably continue. And
you mentioned a little bit earlier on about the devil's in the detail, and I think this is always the thing, isn't it? Everyone look at the benchmark at that 3-year 60, that 1.2% increase, but behind that there is even at sector level, there is a lot of variance, isn't there, in the results from October going into November?
Yeah, and it's the first time that's happened for a few months, because over the last few months it's been really interesting, but pretty much the team of editors have been putting everything up. They look at the data and everything has needed to go up during the month because of the data that we're receiving. We get data in every day, and it's been a really clear picture. What we're seeing now is a lot more mixed. So good value cars, or maybe better value cars than some others. Even those have gone up though. But like MPVs, city cars, upper medium, lower medium, they've all gone up. MPVs by the most. MPVs on average have gone up by £500 in the last month. So they've got sort of room to do that, room to go up. So they look good value versus an SUV maybe. And then you've got SUVs and super minis that have been more stable on average again. only increasing slightly. But even within that, there are some SUVs that have gone down. Nissan Qashqai has gone down this month. Peugeot 3008, Jaguar F-Pace. Maybe there's just a little bit of bulking at those high prices that they are, and they've undergone a very small realignment, really, just a reluctance to pay the sort of the sky-high prices that are out there. So it's really mixed. We've also seen some cars went up in value early on in October. They then started to come down a little bit towards the middle of the month or stabilised. So our live values, which I'm always keen to stress, is the way forward. Don't go for monthly. You've got to look at live. That's changed during the month, and we saw a pattern there of values going up and then stabilising. So this has been the most interesting month of the year for me, even though it's not gone up by the high amounts.
And following on from that, Derren, you mentioned about some of the rises. There's still plenty of winners in terms of values, especially around that 1-year-old mark. And surprisingly, Dacia, because you mentioned two models, the Sandero and the Duster. Which other models sort of caught your attention this month?
So the Duster and the Sandero, they kind of stand out because they're above list price.
Yeah.
Which there are a lot of cars that are above list price now because you can't get a new one, so pay more for a used one. And obviously Dacia product has a low list price, so as a used car, if you can't get the new one, they still look reasonable value. So there's plenty going on there. We have seen those ones that I mentioned that have gone up and then come down again to a certain degree. Sort of Citroen C3, Ford Fiesta, Crossland X, some of the MPVs that have gone up. I mean, the two that stood out for me really was Citroen Berlingo multi-space diesel, which has gone up by 8% in the month. So that's carried on from where it's been. That strength, that's £1,000 at a 3-year point. Ford Galaxy has gone up by over £1,000 or 7% at that 3-year point as well. So that sector is really strong. Electric vehicles, we've had a fuel crisis in the last month, which kind of wasn't a crisis but was a crisis. People queuing for petrol and diesel seems to have made consideration for electric vehicles higher as well. So there's lots of moving parts in the data, really, and as I say, it's been really interesting.
And you mentioned the EV there, and generally what's happening. I mean, we know that the fuel crisis that who started that in the national headlines created a bit of a storm there, didn't they? But that created activity in the retail space. We know from all those classified that there was a significant increase in activity, but we have seen some strength, haven't we, now appearing in the data around EV and alternative fuels, particularly in those older age brackets, I think the report said.
Yeah, the sort of the 3 to 5 year old electric vehicles, they look fairly reasonable value for money versus newer ones. And on average, electric vehicles have gone up by £500 at that 3-year point, which is nearly 2.5%. So I think there's been consideration increasing for electric vehicles over the last few months. It's been in the press. It's obviously there's lots of conferences and the like going on at the moment about the emissions and that type of thing, and that's kind of generated more interest in these without a doubt. And also, I guess when you can't get some other cars that you've got to pay good money for, the electric vehicles, maybe over the last few months, retailers have bought a couple of electric vehicles to see how they get on. They've done well with them, so they'll buy them again, and that's pushing some prices up. There's specialist alternative fuel retailers out there now that are doing well out of these as well. So I think it's the fuel crisis has certainly helped that as well, and also fuel prices are high. So and I guess if you've had an electric vehicle over that 2 week period or whatever when there was queuing for fuel, then you're probably feeling very good about yourself. So it's coming, isn't it? So there will be more of that.
Yeah, we definitely saw a lot of the social posts of those people with electric vehicles in the social media, didn't we? That they were posting pictures of themselves with their car plugged in and don't see what the problem is. But yeah, I think as you say there, I mean it's kind of fallen for EV in many ways, as you say, that shortage of stock, that availability, and I mean I agree with you on that in terms of the shortage of product has potentially accelerated that interest and that confidence in used EVs across the dealer market that may not have actually entered so soon. I think they probably needed to at some point, but were sort of staying away from it a little bit more than they should have done.
Yeah, definitely. It's stimulated it, and it's only going to improve. But we've seen much more disposal volume of electric vehicles this year and compared to previous years. And the fact that values have been strong and are going up is a good thing for that, because we've seen disposal volumes increase by, well, they're 100% up on where they were last year. So it's and that's nearly 160% up on 2019. So that's the volumes we're seeing in our trade data. So that's massively increased, but values have stayed okay this year, partly because the whole market has been strong. But I think now there is more consideration, more concerns about the environment, everybody looking to be green, and that bodes well really for the future for de-fleets of these vehicles.
And just finally on EV, is there any standout models, or that you sort of notice an increase or standout performance, or is it just generally across that 3 to 5 year EV market?
Bear with me a second. I shall have a quick look, because there have been some reasonable movers there, which are so 3 years. Nissan Leaf has gone up by 10% or £1,000. Peugeot Ion has done well, 4%, a couple of £100. The i3, £700, 4%. So yeah, there's others. The Smart 4.2, Volkswagen Golf Electric, Audi e-tron, the I-Pace, and Tesla Model S. They've all gone up by more than the average. So yes, been some good times for those vehicles.
And Derren, the big question, we ask you this every month, what's next for used car values as we enter November? Are we going to start to see more seasonality now, do you think?
As I say, I think there's a little bit more normal behaviour with sort of repricing of cars that have got a bit sticky. We've already sort of seen over the last week that values are really, really stable, and it's probably more over the last 2 weeks actually that there's been a real sort of stable situation. So values aren't really continuing to rise at the moment. They're pretty static. This is always a period where kind of people wait for the monthly figures to go into the auction catalogues and that type of thing, which will be on Monday. I do think, as I say, that the small movement up will stimulate the market a little bit, and I'm expecting, I wouldn't say a level book next month, but I'm expecting that there'll be movement all over the place, but it will be very different by sector. Convertibles, they've been really strong for ages. They're heading down now. I would expect that to continue, but there could still be some upward movements in that MPV area. So it's really, really key to look at the detail now. It is getting a lot more mixed. I think the plateauing will continue. As I say, we're not going to see any increases like we've seen over the last few months, but I don't think it's going to come down heavily either. So I would expect it to be a much smaller movement over the next few weeks than it's been. But as I say, pretty stable. So to any retailers, I wouldn't be overly concerned about doing massive repricing on stock or not buying at the moment, because I don't think there's a crash coming. I really don't. I think when you look at the volumes that are going to return into the market, that it's really obvious that there are not loads of cars coming through over the next few months.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to be that point now, but as you say, there is going to be a need for stock for January, and that we normally have these January sales across the dealer network, and as you say, many of those larger groups may have already stocked up ready for those, as you say, which is why they're holding back a little bit. So, yeah, it's never more time to be using cat butt Black Book Live, is there really, Derren, with this one?
No, definitely, and as I say, different things are moving in different directions and can move up and then down, or over the course of a month. So it's really, really key to take live. And if anybody wants live, then please look me up on LinkedIn, and we can sort that out for you. It is just really important to see what's happening throughout the month, rather than just waiting for those monthly figures.
Fantastic. Well, we'll test what what happens going into the next month or two on the next webinars, the podcast that you join us on. So, leaves me say, Derren, thanks again for joining us today. It's always a pleasure, and providing us with the insight into October value movements and trends. And just as a reminder to those listeners, as Derren says, reach out to him on LinkedIn, or you can find the latest editorials for cars, LCV, and bikes, and the future values for the forecasts on the CAP HPI website now, and so you can head over to cap-hpi.com, click on extras tab, and then select editorials, and you'll find all the editorials in there. But many thanks again for joining us today, Derren. Come back again next month and tell us all about what happened in November, and let's get that crystal ball out again as we head into the final weeks of the year.
Yeah, will do. Thanks, Phil. Thanks, Curtis.